I knew something wasn't right and nobody was really believing me.
Because I knew that there was something wrong with me. Even though the GPs and everybody was saying there wasn't something wrong with me, I knew there was something wrong with me.
I'm sure that a lot of people thought that what I was describing was just in my head.
I was like, I think I might be dying, but that seems like a very dramatic thing to say.
And so I went back to the doctor and said, right, I will pay to see a specialist.
And if I hadn't gone to the hospital when I did, it would have gone into my heart and I wouldn't be here now.
I think it's absolutely appalling that people are still having to go through this battle to get a diagnosis.
I used to go to the gym quite a bit, you know, and I used to go out, you know, socialise and stuff like that. But I wasn't doing any of that anymore, really. I couldn't do anything.
I'd always enjoyed walking, and all of a sudden I realised that hills that I could have walked up easily, I was struggling with.
I was a healthy child, I was a healthy teenager, I was a healthy young adult, I was sporty.
We knew that something was wrong. It felt like Sarah wasn't able to do the things that it felt like she should be able to do. So she was, in general, an active person.
It was the summer just before I turned 15. I started noticing a lot of increased breathlessness, body aches, and chest pain, chest tightness.
I was working on a plant yard at the time, and I'd go from the back door maybe about 100 metres down the yard and I'd just get out of breath. I was climbing off of plant equipment and like I'd feel my chest rattling.
When I started noticing the swelling on my legs, on my feet and my legs, I could hardly walk. I was going from one room to another. I would just be so out of breath.
I'd had long-term consultant care. I'd been deemed to have high-risk pregnancies due to long-term steroid use for underlying rheumatology problems. During my pregnancy with my daughter, I became very ill after she was born. The consultants put it down to a rheumatology flare.
Well, I had all the symptoms of PH. I didn't know what it was, and I'd also been diagnosed with breast cancer.
They just focused on asthma, and I tried all these different inhalers as I was growing up. Started with the blue one, or always had the blue inhaler.
And a brown one. And they said just to use them as and when.
And it wasn't even just inhalers. I had what you put on the spoon, you know, and so see if that works any better.
They would watch me do my asthma inhalers. I admit I was doing them correctly. Didn't understand why they didn't work, but still it was asthma.
When I started going to the GP to report these symptoms, I was basically told that I was unfit and anxious. A young girl in my 20s, I was probably getting a little bit paranoid about my health. I was probably getting a little bit worried that I was no longer as fit as I was, and I was probably a bit lazy. I think that's the sort of thing that was going through their head. And in fact, I've seen my GP notes since, and that's exactly what was going through their head.
And they kept on repeating, have you been taking drugs? Like non-stop, like maybe 6 or 7 hours, just, have you been taking drugs? Like, no, I don't take drugs.
Doctors and nurses were accusing me of being on drugs, were saying it's just anxiety, your iron's probably low, which it wasn't, the blood work said it wasn't, and that I was just being dramatic, and there was nothing wrong, this is normal, and none of it was normal, and I knew that, but I started to believe what they were telling me, because I was like, am I making this up?
So it did take a few years of the doctors, I feel like guessing, just like putting, you know, like guessing what was wrong with me.
I saw lots of different doctors in that time because the GP surgery that I was with had lots of different GPs. So I think I probably saw everyone in their surgery, to be honest.
I had about 30 medical appointments and 10 different doctors.
The time when we were trying to get a diagnosis for Luciana was incredibly difficult. We were going from doctor to doctor and no one seemed to actually believe how ill she was. And as her parents, we sort of almost accepted that there wasn't anything seriously wrong, which was a relief in a way, but there was that niggle, underlying niggle, that we knew that things weren't right.
I'm just going to end up dying. Right, that's what I thought.
I feel like I'm going to die in the next year.
I might be dying, but that seems like a very dramatic thing to say. And then it got confirmed.
They did an ECG, an echo and a CT scan.
I went back to hospital and they did some, I met a doctor that was doing some tests. I think I was doing a bubble echo test or something. And he had heard of PH.
He said, I need to do an echo, but I think I know what you've got. But I've never seen anybody with it before. He said, so we'll do this echo, which he did. I said, is it cancer? He said, no. I said, good. He says, no, it's worse than cancer. And I said, tell me, I am going to live longer than 6 weeks because my daughter's having a baby in 6 weeks. And he looked at me very seriously and said, I can't promise you that. He said, your heart is so bad, I cannot promise you that length of time.
Luckily, a doctor thought of what it might be. So he did a right heart catheter. They told me that it was PH, and then my life sort of just turned upside down from there.
When we finally got an appointment in London and we went and she was given the official diagnosis of pulmonary hypertension, we found it very difficult to actually believe that she'd got this horrendous disease.
I used to sit there and, I don't know, just sob. You know, you're a grown man. Didn't matter. You know, it were bad. You know, I could cry now, to be fair.
I was right. There was something wrong with me. And yeah, it was just a complete relief. I mean, all those other emotions came later, but for a large part, for a long time, I was just happy that I had a name for what was wrong with me, that I was no longer ashamed of my illness because I was no longer worrying that people didn't believe me.
Getting a diagnosis felt like we finally had some answers. We finally knew what was happening to my body and we could take the right direction into helping me get better, improve my life and, you know, live it to the best I can.
Yeah, it's extremely important that diagnoses are sped up, looked into and given to people because people, when you get left so long without a diagnosis, your health just declines and declines and you won't get that health back.
I absolutely feel if Luciana had been diagnosed earlier, the damage to her body would not have been as severe and the treatment would have been far more effective. Her lungs were so damaged by that point that it wasn't as effective as it could have been if it had been caught really early. And that's a terrible thing to come to terms with.
If I was diagnosed earlier, then I don't think my condition would have progressed the way it has. I don't think I would have been on oxygen.
I believe that had I been diagnosed earlier, I would not have had heart failure because medication could have controlled it. And by having the heart failure, I spent a month away from an 8-month-old baby and had an IV line put in, which in turn really impacted on my ability to care for my child.
I feel my late diagnosis robbed me of those first few months with my precious granddaughter. I couldn't hold her, I couldn't lift her, I couldn't carry, I couldn't change a nappy. Had I been diagnosed earlier, I would have been in a better position and I would have been the grandma I would have wanted to be. But that was not to be. And it's still not, even now, because they left it too late for me.
If I would have been tested earlier, it wouldn't have been as severe as what it was. And I don't think that as much damage would have been done by the disease.
I think if I'd have been diagnosed much sooner, I would have been a lot better and more well than I am now.
I think it's important to get diagnosed quickly to get you on the right path of medication, to help you understand how to cope with your illness, and to hopefully give you a better chance of living longer and not get into a point where your heart is in trouble, your lungs are in trouble, you're in trouble.
The fact that treatments have improved dramatically over the last decade or more is fantastic, and it really does empower people and enable people to live much happier, more productive and longer lives, and that's all fantastic. But you can only get treated if you're diagnosed, and so getting that step to diagnosis is crucially important.
If I could speak directly to my GP now, my GP at the time, I'd wish that I'd ask him, I'd say, why didn't you, when this other treatment wasn't working, why didn't you send me to see a specialist then? I'd like to say that you need to look up on pulmonary hypertension like you do COPD, emphysema, asthma and other lung conditions that you already know about. You need to be looking up about this, you see.
I do appreciate it's rare, but there's lots of rare illnesses out there and people listen to other people, but PH, no.
I think it's absolutely appalling that people are still having to go through this battle to get a diagnosis. You know, we should be learning from these dreadful experiences. So many people have a terrible time, and it takes months and months, if not years, to get a diagnosis. They need to be listened to.
In the last 15 years, the time to get a diagnosis has apparently not changed, which I think is awful.
It's shocking. It really is shocking. Although it's difficult to diagnose somebody with this disease, it should not take, from what I'm seeing, 2 to 3 years. People are literally on death's doors before they get diagnosed.
When I'd got the diagnosis, I thought, no, this is ridiculous that all these years and nobody, it's not something that people think about.
It takes a long time to get referred to somebody. It shouldn't take so long, you know. Some people might be worse than what I was, and they might not get a chance to see anybody else. And it ought to be a lot better for people who are being diagnosed now, because them people are the same as me, they're scared.
The journey to diagnosis, it'd have to be horrific.
Devastation.
Difficult.
Turmoil.
Emotional.
Unbelievable.